Hello, everyone. My name is James Adams, and I'm the Director of Pro Content here at Renewed Vision. I just wanted to say thank you for joining us. Let's not waste any time. Let's dive right in. So the big question we want to answer today is this: what actually makes a sermon series graphic successful? Because if you've been at church a while or been in media for any length of time, you've probably noticed something. The best looking design is not always the most effective design. In fact, some of the most visually impressive graphics we see, the ones, with all the effects or the filters, the detail, maybe even some crazy creativity, sometimes those are the ones that struggle the most in a real church environment. So success here isn't just about making something that looks cool, it's about making something that works. And everything we've seen across thousands of churches, thousands of graphics, and a lot of real world usage, there are a few principles that consistently separate the graphics that connect from the ones that don't. The first is clarity over complexity. The best sermon series graphics are instantly understandable. You don't have to stop and think about it. You don't have to decode it. You don't have to ask, wait, what is this about? Within a second or two, someone should be able to look at the screen and get the core idea. Because the reality is, most people aren't going to be sitting there studying your design. They're walking in, they're talking, they're distracted, they're settling into their seat, they're drinking a coffee. You have a very small window to communicate something meaningful, and clarity wins every single time. The second is having a strong central idea. This is where a lot of designs start to fall apart. Instead of one clear concept, we try to include everything: multiple symbols, metaphors, visual directions, and then what happens is basically nothing stands out. Your strongest ideas are built around one idea, one visual anchor, one concept that everything else kind of supports. When something and somebody looks at it, they don't want to see five things competing for attention. They want to see one thing clearly. The third is readability at a distance. This is huge, and honestly, it's one of the most overlooked things by most designers. Designing on a laptop or a desktop screen is not the same as designing for a room. What looks great up close can completely fall apart from the back row. Text gets too small, contrast gets too low, details get lost. So a simple test is this: would someone sitting at the very back of the room still be able to read and understand it? And if the answer is no, then the design probably isn't finished yet. Because in a church setting, the screen isn't just a decoration, it's communication. And as you know, there's lots of different age groups and visual abilities that are in a church, and you want to make sure that you're accommodating for all of them. The fourth is emotional tone match. Your design should feel like what you're talking about. If the series is heavy, reflective, maybe dealing with something serious, the design should carry that weight. If it's celebratory, uplifting, full of energy, the design should reflect that too. Where things feel off is when there is that mismatch. A light, playful design for like a serious topic, or a dark, heavy design for something meant to feel hopeful. People may not be able to articulate it, but they feel it immediately. Good design reinforces the message before even a single word is spoken. And the fifth is consistency across your platforms. Your sermon series graphic doesn't just live on a Sunday morning screen. It shows up everywhere: social media, your website, slides, announcements, emails. So it has to work in multiple formats and multiple sizes. That means thinking beyond just one layout. Does it still look good as a square post? Does it still read well as a story? Does it still feel consistent across everything we are putting out? The most effective series designs are cohesive. They create a unified visual language that people start to recognize throughout the week. So when you put all that together, a successful sermon series graphic is not just about creativity, it's about clarity, it's about focus, it's about communication, it's about creating something that people can understand quickly, feel emotionally, and recognize consistently. And when you get those things right, that's when designs stop being just visual and they start being impactful. So to continue this on, I'm going to send this over to Adam to talk a little bit about design software.
Thanks, James. Before we get into the hands-on portion of today's webinar, I want to take a few minutes to talk about the two tools we're going to be working with, Photoshop and Canva, and why we chose these two specifically. If you've spent any time in creative work, you've probably encountered both of these at one point or another. But I want to make sure everyone is on the same page about what each one is, what it's good at, and why you would reach for one over the other. Let's start with Photoshop. Photoshop has been around for a long time. It's one of the most established professional design tools in the world. Designers, photographers, and creative teams across every industry use it. What makes Photoshop powerful is its flexibility. You can work with complex layered files, do detailed image editing, composite multiple photos together, and produce graphics at any resolution you need. If you're working with a professional design template, like the ones we're going to look at today, Photoshop is where those files live and where you have the most control over every element. Now, that power comes with a learning curve. If you're newer to design, Photoshop can feel a little intimidating at first, and that's okay. That's why we're going to walk through it together. Canva is a very different kind of tool, and that difference is actually its biggest strength. Canva was built from the ground up to be accessible to people who don't have a design background. It's browser-based, it's intuitive, and it's grown enormously in popularity over the past few years. Not just with beginners, but increasingly with experienced designers too, because of how easy it is to share files, collaborate with other people on your team, send things to print, and manage multiple formats at once. I also wanted to bring this up in case you weren't aware. PSD files, which is the native format Photoshop uses, aren't locked to Photoshop. They can be opened in other applications as well, which makes them a pretty flexible format for layered design work. For this webinar, I actually won't be using Photoshop at all. I'll be using a program called Pixelmator Pro for macOS, which handles PSD files really well. There are a number of other options for both Mac and PC. So even if your whole team isn't on Photoshop, working with PSD-based templates is still very much an option. Both of these tools have a real place in a church creative workflow. The right choice depends on your team's skill level, your budget, and what you're trying to produce. And honestly, a lot of teams use both. Photoshop for the heavy lifting on primary graphics, and Canva for quick social posts and collaboration with volunteers or other staff. We're going to spend some time with each today, and James is going to show you some really practical things you can do in Canva, especially for those of you who are just getting started or working with a small team.
All right. So as we move into the practical side of this, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about how actually to create these kinds of graphics. Because up to now, we've been talking about principles, what makes something effective, what separates good from great, what the next question is, but how do we actually go and build this? And really, what are the two main approaches that we're seeing right now? The first approach is designing from scratch. This is what most people are familiar with, using tools like Photoshop, Canva, and building something completely custom for your church. This is where you have full creative control. You're choosing the layout, the fonts, the colors, the imagery. You're shaping the entire direction from the ground up. And honestly, there's a lot of value in doing that because it allows you to create something that is really specific to your message, to your audience, to your church context. You're not limited by a template. You're not boxed into someone else's idea. You get to create something that feels truly yours. Now, the trade-off is if it takes a lot of time, it can take skill, it can take a lot of trial and error to get something to a place where it really feels right and you have other people's opinions on it. But for a lot of teams, this is still the core way that they design. The second approach is something that's become a lot more common recently, and that's using AI as part of the design process. And I want to pause here just for a second because I know that this can be a bit of a mixed topic. Some people are all in on AI, they're excited about it, they're experimenting with it, they're using it every day. Other people are maybe a little bit more unsure. And then there are people who just don't want anything to do with it at all. And that might be you watching this right now. You might fall into one of those three categories. And all those reactions are absolutely understandable. So here's the reality when it comes to AI. It is here and it's improving quickly and it's already being used by a lot of teams, whether we realize it or not. So my view is instead of ignoring it or pretending like it's not part of the conversation, we'd actually be doing a disservice if we didn't at least show you how or where it can be helpful. Now, that doesn't mean AI replaces creativity. It doesn't mean it replaces designers. It doesn't mean you just type something in and you're done. That is absolutely not the goal. The goal is to use it like a tool, like you're using Photoshop, like you're using Canva. Think of it more like this: AI can help you generate ideas. Maybe you're stuck at the beginning and you don't know where to start. It can help you explore directions you hadn't thought of yet. It can help you speed up your workflow. Instead of spending hours trying to create a base concept, you can get something on the screen quickly and start refining. And if it can help remove some of the friction, especially if you're short on time or if design isn't your primary skill set. Because the reality for a lot of church teams is this: you're not just designing, you're running slides, you're managing services, you're handling tech, you're doing probably 100 different things. So anything that helps you move faster without sacrificing quality is worth paying attention to. So as we go through this next section, we're going to walk through both of these approaches. We'll take a look at what it actually looks like to design from scratch. And we'll also show you where AI can fit into that process in a really practical way, not as a replacement, but as something that can support and enhance what you're already doing. And the goal here isn't to tell you there's only one right way to do this. It's to give you tools. It's so that no matter your skill level, no matter your time constraints, you can creatively make graphics that are clear, effective, and actually work in your context.
All right, let's get into it. I want to start with something James said in the intro that I think is really important to repeat. And that's that neither of us are formally trained designers. We've both been doing this long enough, learning along the way, making mistakes, figuring out what works, and slowly building on what we know. So if you're sitting here feeling like you're at the beginning of your journey, that is totally fine. That's where we all started. And what matters is that you keep going. So, what I have here is a completed sermon series graphic from our pro service bundle. And I want to use this as our working example today because I think it does a lot of things really well. And it's a great case study for what we talked about earlier, which is what makes a graphic actually work. So before we go anywhere near the layers, I just want you to look at it. When you see it for the first time, what do you notice? What does your eye go to first? For most people, it's going to be the title and then the imagery. That's intentional. A good sermon series graphic has a clear visual hierarchy. There's a primary thing that grabs your attention, and then everything else supports that. You shouldn't have to figure out where to look. Now, here's something that's more important in 2026 than probably ever before. The graphic needs to work in multiple places. It's not just going to live on your main screen on Sunday morning. It's going on Instagram, it's going on Facebook, it might be printed on a flyer or a bulletin or a postcard. And each of those environments has different requirements, different dimensions, viewing distances, and different contexts. That means when you're evaluating a graphic, you can't just judge it on your laptop screen at full size. You need to ask yourself, can someone read this from the back row? Does it still communicate on a phone screen when it's being scaled down to a square? Does the core message come through at a glance? I think this graphic holds up across all of those, and we're going to look at why right now. So, what you're looking at here is the layer structure of this file. I know this can look overwhelming when you first open a PSD and see a list of 30 layers, but let's try and simplify it. When it comes to a sermon series graphic, there are really just a few things that matter: the title, the subtitle, or supporting text if there is any, the imagery, and the overall tone, which is carried by things like color, texture, and lighting. Everything else, the effects, the shadows, the blending modes, exist to serve those four things. Now, let me show you what I mean. If I turn everything off except the title, you can still see immediately what the series is called and roughly what it feels like. That's going to be our foundation. Start there anytime you're trying to evaluate a graphic. Now, watch what happens as we build the rest of it back in. The imagery gives it a world to exist in. The color grading creates the emotional tone. The series has a specific feeling, and the color treatment of the photo reinforces that. The effects, the light, the glow, the subtle texture add depth so it doesn't feel flat. Now, let's talk about the topography for a second. Let me zoom in here. Notice the font choice here. It's strong, it's clean, and it has presence. One of the most common mistakes I see in church graphics is using a font that looks great on a design but falls apart at a distance or at small sizes. This font works at 300 pixels wide on a phone, and it's going to work at full resolution on a 20-foot LED wall. That's what we're looking for. Currently, this title doesn't have a drop shadow on it, but let's add one. It's a subtle shift, but it's doing important work. It separates the text from the background and makes it readable even over a complex image. If you ever have text that feels like it's getting lost on top of the graphic, adding a shadow or a slight inner glow is usually the easiest way to fix that. Now, let's talk about the image itself. This one comes from Unsplash, which is a free stock photography resource that I use all the time. The quality is amazing, the images are free to use, and the range is broad enough that you can usually find something that fits with your concept. When you're choosing an image for a sermon series graphic, you're looking for something that has the right emotional tone, enough visual space for your text to sit, and a composition that doesn't fight with your design. Simple, strong images almost always work better than busy, complex ones. Now, what if you can't find the exact right image? What if your series concept is abstract or you need something that just doesn't exist online? Now, that's where AI generated imagery can be incredibly useful. And James is going to dig into that a little bit later, so I'll let him take that one. The main takeaway from everything I've shown you here is don't be intimidated by a complex file. The essentials just need to be stripped back. So just start from the ground up. Look for the title, the image, and the tone, and build from there. The rest is just going to be fine tuning.
All right. Thank you, Adam. So let's talk about a tool that honestly has changed the game for a lot of churches, and that is Canva. Canva has this reputation of being more of a beginner's tool, and to a certain extent, that's true. But what's really interesting is it's not just for beginners anymore. We're actually seeing a lot more experienced designers using Canva. And the reason is pretty simple. It's easy, it's fast, and it is collaborative. You can share files instantly. You can get things ready for print without a ton of setup. You can have multiple people on your team jump in and make edits. And honestly, the barrier to entry is just so much lower. Not to mention, it is significantly more affordable than something like Adobe Photoshop. So let me give you a real world example of this. My wife uses Canva all the time. She's not a designer. She's never been trained in design, but she's constantly making things. Church flyers, birthday invitations for our kids, event graphics. And the key thing is she doesn't feel intimidated by it. She's excited to use it. She can open it up and make something that looks good and actually enjoy the process of designing. And that's a big deal because for a lot of people, design tools feel overwhelming and Canva removes a lot of that friction. So let me show you what this actually looks like in practice. Let's say we go to Pro Content and we open up a template and we dive right in. So right away, what you'll notice is everything is structured for you. You've got your layout, you've got your typography, you've got your imagery. And the way Canva works is through layers. but in a very, very approachable way. You can click on any element, text, image, background, and just change it. And let's say you get a request and you want to change the title. You can click on it and then type. And let's say you've reviewed it to your pastor and they want to change the image. Well, you can drag and drop a new image in and make the change. You can adjust the colors with just a couple clicks. Basically, you can change basically everything. There's no digging through complex menus, no advanced technical knowledge required. It's very visual and very intuitive and just really well designed. And what this does, especially for churches, is it makes design accessible to more people on your team. You don't have to be the one person who does everything. You can actually hand the project off. Someone else can do the series title, someone else can create the social posts, someone else can adapt it for announcements. And that flexibility is huge. Now, also, I know even with something like Canva, some people still might feel a little bit intimidated by it. Or maybe you don't love the idea of starting from a template, or you want something more original, but you're not quite sure how to get there. And that's where this next piece comes in. So let's again talk about AI because it is here, it is being used, and we want to talk specifically about how it can be fit into this process. Now, again, I know this can be a bit of a mixed topic. Some people are excited about it, some people are cautious, some people are going to want to avoid it altogether. And again, that is completely fair. But here's where I think it can actually be really helpful, especially in a church context and specifically with Canva. Let's think about AI not as the final product, but as a starting point. For example, you can go into ChatGPT and simply describe the sermon series you want, the theme, the tone, and the kind of imagery you're thinking about. And it can help you generate ideas, concepts, even directions that you can then bring into Canva natively if you connect Canva to ChatGPT. So instead of starting with a blank screen, you're starting with something and then shaping it from there. Now, when it comes to AI imagery specifically, this is where things have changed a lot in a very short period of time. The quality has improved dramatically, the speed is incredible, and the possibilities, honestly, are just pretty wide open. But we also want to be thoughtful about how we use it. I've learned this by doing it well and not doing it well. So the pros and there are cons. The pro side, it's fast, it's flexible, it can help you create visuals that would be really difficult or time consuming otherwise. And on the other side, there is cons. There are questions around originality, around overuse, and around making sure it feels intentional and aligned with your message. So, where do I personally stand when it comes to the AI? And where do I think it really works really well is storytelling, especially with biblical storytelling. Because for a lot of us, we've heard these stories our entire lives. We've never actually seen them in a visual way that feels fresh sometimes. And AI can bring those moments to life, not as a perfect or literal representation, but as an artistic interpretation. Take something, let's say, like the burning bush. You're trying not to recreate it exactly because none of us were there. You're recreating a visual representation that helps people feel the moment, the weight of it, the wonder of it, the significance of it. And AI can be a really powerful tool in helping you explore that. So, again, the goal here isn't to replace creativity, it's to support it, whether you're using Canva templates, designing from scratch, or experimenting with AI. These are all just tools. And the more comfortable you get using them, the more confident you'll become in creating graphics that actually connect with people. I'm going to send it over to Adam now, who's going to talk more about visuals.
Thanks, James. I want to zoom out for a moment, if I could, and talk about something that I think gets overlooked a lot in church creative work. And that's visual cohesion across the full arc of a service, not just the series graphic. A lot of churches put a lot of effort into getting that series graphic right. But then on Sunday morning, they're running worship backgrounds that have nothing to do with the visual world they just created. And that disconnect is something your congregation feels, even if they can't articulate it. The good news is that it doesn't take a ton of extra work to address this. You just have to think about it intentionally. When you purchase a pro service bundle, what you're getting isn't just a static graphic. The bundles include video assets, motion backgrounds, lower thirds, and other production elements that are designed to work together as part of a cohesive visual system. Those of you who have experience in production know that it gives you a lot to work with. You can bring them in a Pro Presenter, apply them to your screens, and build out a look for the whole service that feels consistent from the moment people walk in to the moment they leave. So here we've got our series graphic, your social graphics, your motion backgrounds, and they're all sharing the same visual language. It's a very different experience from a church that has a great title slide, but generic backgrounds behind every other song. Now, here's something we love to do at Pro Content, and I think it's one of the more creative ways to use what's available to you. So, we have an enormous library of worship motion backgrounds, different collections with different moods, colors, and aesthetics. And when a new sermon series comes out, one of the things we always think about is which of our existing worship collections pair naturally with this theme. So, let's take a look at this. This series has a specific color palette, a specific emotional tone. And if you pull a worship collection that echoes those same qualities, similar colors, similar energy, similar feel, suddenly that whole service has this visual continuity that makes everything feel intentional and polished. It's not about being matchy matchy necessarily, it's about staying in the same emotional world throughout the service. This kind of pairing, series graphics, social assets, and worship backgrounds, is how you move from having a set of graphics to having a complete visual experience for your congregation. And the best part is that a lot of these assets are already made. You're not starting from zero, you're just curating and combining things. And that's a completely achievable workflow for teams of any size. So, as you think about your next series, I'd encourage you to not just think about the title slide, but think about the entire Sunday experience. What do people see when they walk through the door? Because that's where the experience begins. And thinking about that full picture is where great church creative work begins.
All right, we're moving on now to the Q&A section. You guys have submitted a ton of questions and I'm going to do my absolute best to answer them. I'm going to read through a whole bunch here and I will just do my best as if we were sitting in a coffee shop to give you my advice. So the first question I see here is from Matthew. He goes to a church that is between 500 and 1,000 people and he has two questions. He says, where do I find good inspiration for graphic designs? And how do I build an effective workflow when I wear many hats on staff? Inspiration for me tends to find me rather than I find it. So either on Instagram or Pinterest or even just watching other people's YouTube channels, I find on Instagram, I happen to be scrolling and I'll see something that kind of like just catches my eye, specifically when it comes to like either sermon series or the worship collections that we make for backgrounds, for worship backgrounds. Those ones, if it's like a cool place, I have a bunch of different photographers that I follow who just will take an amazing shot of a beautiful landscape somewhere beautiful in the world and I'll save it and then I'll make sure to go research it later. That is how I find inspiration. So if you're talking specifically about sermon series, there are plenty of really amazing sermon series designers out there on Instagram or even Pro Content, and you'll see a design that you like, and then hopefully you'll see that design, and then you'll want to kind of reverse engineer and figure out how you can make it. That's what works for me. See what someone else did, and then figure out how I can reverse engineer it to create something that has the same look and feel and vibe that I liked when I first saw the image. And then building an effective workflow. This is something that I think we do really well at Pro Content, and it's making sure that you are building repeatable tasks and finding out what are the things that take up the most time. So maybe for a couple of weeks, a good thing to do would be literally write down as you're going through your day what you're working on and then time track it. And then come back after 2 weeks and see what you spent the most time on. I think this sometimes surprises people. Like, be real honest with yourself. If you end up a little bit distracted, write that down. If you end up in a lot of meetings, write that down. And if you happen to take a long lunch, track that. Find out where you're losing time so that you can have an honest conversation with yourself. And then where the most time is being spent is where you're going to find the most efficiency. So if you spend a large amount of time just designing, then maybe you need to start considering other tools to speed up your workflow, or maybe you need to bring on some help. There are lots of things that could speed up your workflow. It just comes down to where are you spending the most amount of time and what actually needs to be improved. There are some designers who can really design well once they've been given the full concept and they can just take it really fast to the next level. Whereas other people may not be as efficient with the actual tools themselves, but are really great at coming up with ideas on the fly and coming up with these really simple concepts like we talked earlier. Michelle, she's also from a church with 500 to 1,000 people. How can a small team keep the designs and graphic packages fresh with limited resources, both time and budget, without frustration? To me, the answer to this is using templates. Pro Content has thousands of templates that you can choose from. And often coming up with the ideas or coming up with the visual language is the hard part. It always was for me before the world of templates. It's hearing someone like your pastor's creative vision and then trying to land on something that they like can take a long time. So if you've got limited time and limited budget, Pro Content is $200 a year and you get access to thousands of templates, which are head starts by hours worth of work. So take a couple concepts, just download the straight JPEG from Pro Content, take it to whoever's kind of designed the series, whether it's your pastor or a leader or a speaker, and say, here's what I've got, which direction you like the most. And they're going to probably point to one, and boom, you're like already hours into it. You've got a head start. That is a very affordable way and a very time efficient way to get that series designed and going. And now you're just changing some small details, and you've got probably within a couple hours the next review of a maybe almost finished graphic. Angela comes from a church of 1 to 500 people. How can we guide pastors who keep putting too many words on a slide? I think this is very helpful to maybe give them a good design versus bad design kind of optionality. So I know this is always a struggle. People want to put a lot of text in it, and we all inherently know as designers that less is often more. We talked earlier about simplicity. I think it would be so helpful that even if you are getting a strong recommendation, or I really want more, design that alternate version and try to slowly steer them towards simplicity. I think people inherently will get drawn to the simpler graphic, but sometimes they need to be shown it. Not everyone can imagine it, what it would look like with less words. So do your best to kind of do that for them. It might create a little bit more work on your end, but hopefully what you're doing is not only training and teaching someone who is a great pastor or a great speaker, you're training them and teaching them in the design language. And hopefully you're able to start building up that trust where they can start giving you more concepts and put those into designs rather than tell you, here's what I want. I want the full verse. You can start breaking it down to themes and concepts. We talked about that earlier. It's trying to capture what that person is going for and then give them a really good, strong, simplistic design. And then use what we talked about earlier. Try to make the argument that this is going to be easier for all different age groups to read and understand. We want visitors to be able to understand the concept of what you're trying to preach this Sunday. The simpler, the quicker the people are going to understand and get on board with what that sermon is about. Caleb comes from a church of 500 to 1,000 people. How can you help your pastor create a better vision for his sermon series so that you can make the best series content for both of you? So I think what you're asking here, Caleb, is how do we land on a good design that also kind of matches what the pastor is talking about? And I think we've kind of talked about that a little bit in the previous questions, which is I think you almost need to think of yourself less just as a person, taking the tools and just making something, and thinking more of a leader and how to communicate to your church, to your congregation. So taking the pastor or whoever is requesting this and take them on a bit of a journey in that, ask them the questions like, what are you trying to accomplish? What is the end goal? What are the moods you're trying to hit on? This is what a lot of graphic designs companies will do with their different clients, and trying to make sure that they can get that first rough draft to be basically an approval the first time. So this happens with graphic design or video clients. You want to understand what the client is hoping for so that you can best achieve that. I think this is where sometimes designers at churches will hold back or sell themselves a little bit short. And I want you to have the confidence to start learning how to interpret what someone's going for and then put that onto the page, onto the graphic. So ask those kinds of questions. And then again, I'll go back to using the templated idea. Take some different designs of things that you like visually, just from a concept standpoint, and put them in front of that person and say, which ones do you like? And then once they kind of picked a few, why? What about them do you like? And they're going to reveal things to you, whether it's the size of the font, the color, the imagery. You're going to start learning what they actually want. Shirley comes from a church of less than 100. How do you add backgrounds you create in Canva to use as ProPresenter slides? This is pretty easy, Shirley. Up in the top right, you're going to see share. In share, you're going to get your different options, whether it's to actually share the template or download. And then this really just matters kind of what your screen resolution is and what you're hoping for. So I would say large majority of churches use 16:9 screens. And so you're going to want to download that version. But from there, you can also download the different resolutions and you have the different sharing and printing options. This is where Canva does make it really easy for you, is they kind of have that prepped and then they have some different third-party tools that you can connect to either print or get those sent to you and put onto different things. So this is where Canva really is powerful. Some of those things are extra, but for just downloading your graphic and importing it into ProPresenter, it's pretty easy. It's an extra step, but is really straightforward. And for someone that wants to use Canva over Photoshop, while it is another step, you're also gaining a lot more power in the way that you can design as a non-graphic designer, if you might think of yourself that way, which you really shouldn't, because people who are using Canva are graphic designers. This is just the tool to create the vision. So use those tools, and Canva has made that aspect of it really, really easy. Matt goes to a church of 100 to 500. How to better leverage our pro content membership, series creation, and social media. We're constantly adapting and learning. If you've been with us for a while, you would know that we used to have sermon series and then just social media categories. We've combined those into Photoshop templates, and now we have pro service bundles, which we're launching every month. And those are meant to be a full design bundle for everything. So you're still using artboards in Photoshop, but when you go and you make changes, you're making it for all the potentially different types of screens that you could ever use in your building or on devices, as well as we include some video pre-made elements that match those sermon slides so that you can have some video loops or some backgrounds to go behind other graphics if you want to have some more moving pastoral slides where there's a little bit of motion to them. So we're including a lot of the different graphical elements to be kind of your one-stop shop. That should make life easier because, one, not only do they look fantastic and are designed by our designers, but they're going to save you time down the line. As one of our earlier questions was asking, is like, how do I be more efficient? Well, skip steps if you can. It is okay to skip steps when you are wearing multiple hats at a church. And so the pro service bundles are designed specifically for that. Wendy goes to a church that is less than 100. How do I create slides for people with vision challenges, poor vision, and slow readers? I think we talked about this at the very beginning, is you have to keep it simple, limit the amount of words, and make the font bigger. It really also depends on your church. If you know that there are very specific people in your congregation that have vision challenges, then you have to make big, bold, and high contrast text. You can't have a blue background with red text because that will be a struggle for people. You're going to have to stick with a darker background and white text so that it is very clear to read. But that doesn't mean that you can't be thoughtful about your designs. Jeremy, Church of 500 to 1,000. What AI tools are you finding useful? I'm using either ChatGPT, Claude, or Midjourney. Midjourney, because we're talking about visuals right now, does not do text very well at the time of this video, but it does a really great job, in my mind, of interpreting Bible verses. So when you're trying to think of stories that seem kind of wild, like we talked earlier, the burning bush or Noah and all the animals or angels, thousands of angels, celebrating the birth of Jesus. How do you create that? Well, Midjourney is a great tool for that. It is a paid service, but it does create really inspiring graphics and images that can be used to kind of convey emotion to the congregation. And I am a proponent of using those tools as long as you are helping to inspire people to Jesus. And the last one I'm going to do is Zach. He goes to a church of 100 to 500. Would just love templates for a church with a lower budget. I hope that we have you covered here, Matt. Pro content is $200 a year, and you get access to tens of thousands of pieces of content. There is no limits on what you can download once you are a member. Our goal here is simple, is to serve you and help your church be resourced.
So this one comes from Matthew, and he wants to know about finding good inspiration for graphic designs and how to build an effective workflow when you wear many hats on staff. So that's a couple of things. First off, it's a matter of trying to find designers that speak to your sensibilities. Some good places to look would be Instagram, of course. And then there's a website called dribble.com, which is a kind of a marketplace for graphic designers. And you could literally just go there and type the word church in, and it's going to show up with a bunch of different designers and stuff that they've worked on. And it's just a good kind of sounding board and jumping off point when you're looking for direction. If I was going to shout out some specific folks on Instagram, there is one called Ask the Lonely Media that does a lot of really cool kind of contemporary designs. And I just wanted to shout out a former coworker of mine, Wes Allen. He's got a design firm called Peacemakers Creative. If you've seen any graphic work from the North Point ministry campus level, he's one of the guys behind a lot of that stuff. Now, workflows are a little bit different. Workflows are personal. So whatever I suggest may not work for what you're accustomed to. So it's really about finding the path that makes the most sense to you, starting with what works, and then just iterating and optimizing. Hopefully that helps clarify. This one comes from Ashley. It says, where can I download fonts I don't have for pro content designs? Are there any specific trusted sites? So I did want to say that for some assets on the pro content site, like PSD templates, you'll actually see links for those fonts included in the download page. You would just click on the name of the font and it would take you to the site that has the font that you're looking for. But as far as like a short list goes, Adobe Fonts, Google Fonts, those are both good sites. And then some third-party sites like defont.com, that's DAFONT.com, and Bfonts, BEFONTS. Those are both great places to find fonts for your designs. And then this one doesn't have a name on it. It just says designing for LED screens versus projector screens. And there was actually multiple folks who asked this question. And as far as building things go, the way that you need to approach them is consider the area that they're using. So projectors are typically going to be off stage. And so they're going to follow general graphic design principles. So your text is going to be centered, or whatever composition you're using might be using the traditional rule of thirds in regards to the way that things are laid out. LED walls are walls. So your designs need to account for portions of your display being obstructed by people, set pieces, and things like that. So a lot of the times when you're doing things like text, it's going to be in the upper third of the layout because otherwise it's going to be blocked by other folks and stuff. And so let's see. The last one here is from Joan. It says, "Where do I find just plain backgrounds to use? Can I download pictures from my computer?" And yeah, of course you can. Hopefully, what we covered today gives you a good idea of what you should be looking for as far as what your graphics should consist of and what you should avoid. And then, like we mentioned earlier, check out Upsplash for royalty-free stock photos. And for the most part, anything that's used in a church environment is going to fall under fair use. But just be aware that it would be better for you to either source them yourself by taking them or getting them from people or using a service like Upsplash. And that's going to do it for the Q&A section. I'll throw it back over to James here.
Thank you, Adam. And as we wrap up, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for taking the time to be here, to learn, to grow, and to invest in what you're doing at your church. We know how much goes into this, and we don't want to take that lightly. Before you go, I just want to leave you with a couple things. First, we've put together a collection of free resources and assets for you. And when we say free, we mean it. There's no payment, there's no credit card, there's no hidden catch. The heart behind it is really simple. We want to serve churches, especially churches that maybe don't have the budget or the resources or a full design team behind them. If that's you, we've got you covered. So make sure you check those out and take advantage of them. And please tag us on social media, on Instagram and Facebook. We love seeing how you're using Pro content. Second, for those of you who are interested in going a little deeper with Pro content, we're also offering no sign-up fee. So if you've been curious, if you've been on the fence, this is a really easy way to step into Pro content, explore it without that upfront barrier. And then lastly, we love to stay connected with you. If you can find us on Instagram, we'll try to follow you back. We want to see what you're doing. Please tag us. We love sharing ideas and inspiration and practical content there all the time. So if you're not already part of it, join the Church Creatives Facebook group. That's an incredible space for other like-minded church creatives. There are thousands of people in there sharing ideas and questions and helping others out. It's one of the best communities you can be a part of in the church media space. So again, we thank you for being here. We're cheering you on, and we're excited to see what you create.